This is wild cherry, Prunus avium, a native tree to the UK and very common. You'll find it around woodland edges and also throughout towns and cities, in parks and along roads. The wild cherries found growing in the UK are the same species as the shop-bought cherries, though the ones found in the shops are larger cultivated fruits. But wild cherries are just as tasty. The cherries are usually very expensive in shops. I've seen them for £3 or more for a small punnet, where you can just pick them for free and you get thousands on each tree. They're an important food source for birds, so to compromise I just take the lower down fruit and leave all the ones higher up on the tree for the birds. There are several species of cherry in the UK. All true cherries are edible, though some are very sour and are best used only for cooking. Bird cherry, Prunus padus for example, are very sour and can cause a stomach upset if you eat too many. An easy way to tell the difference is with bird cherry, you'll just get a single fruit attaching by its stem to the branch, whereas wild cherry like this, you'll see there's several fruits all attached to the same point as a cluster. So just to be absolutely sure that you've got a cherry tree, the bark will be grey with darker horizontal lines, and the leaves will be oval, come to a pointed tip, and they'll be serrated. And at the base of the leaf, there'll be two red glands. Wild cherry, Prunus avium, are usually nice and sweet, and they're good just eaten raw, straight off the tree. It's one of the first good fruit gluts of the year, so you can easily collect enough to preserve. Any cherries that taste too sour are better being used for making cherry brandy or any sort of preserves where you're using a lot of sugar, like making jam. Cherries are also good dehydrated. Just cut them and remove the stone, and then the dried cherries can be used for granola or for trail mixes. And just like with shop-bought cherries, make sure you don't eat the stones because they are toxic. This is pineapple weed, Matricaria discoidea, also known as wild chamomile. It's from the daisy family, and it can grow up to around 20 centimetres. It's about the biggest it gets there. You'll find it in fields and meadows, and it especially likes well trampled grounds. So look along pathways and near entrances to fields. That's where it's most likely to grow. So the main identifier for this plant is the smell, and it smells almost exactly like pineapple. And you'll get that smell just from walking through a patch, but if you collect some of the flowers and crush them and smell those, you'll get a really strong, nice pineapple smell. Its flower heads almost look a little bit like mini pineapples, and they look quite similar to daisy flowers but without the white petals. So the leaves are quite feather-like, and they also have a slight pineapple smell. And the only plants you'll really mistake this for are chamomile and mayweed, which have very similar looking leaves, but they don't have the pineapple smell. So it's good eaten raw. You can just snip it into your salad. I most often use it for making tea. It's related to chamomile, which is a good soporific, and pineapple weed is too. I especially like it mixed with the linden blossoms, which I featured in last video, because they're both a soporific. They work well together, and it's a nice blend of flavours. Right then, back to it. So, pineapple weed, as I was saying, makes a really good tea. It's got quite a subtle flavour, so you need to put quite a bit in to make a nice tasting tea. And you just want to collect the top parts of the plant, so the flower heads and the top leaves. That's got most of the flavour. And I find it's better fresh than dried. It doesn't keep the flavour too well dried. So as well as using them for making tea, you can also make a nice pineapple weed cordial or syrup. And another use for them, they're a good insect repellent. So if you get some of the flower heads, give them a bit of a squeeze and then rub it on your skin, it should keep away any mosquitoes or midges. These are Oregon grapes, the fruit of the Mahonia bush. Mahonia is a small shrub that's non-native to Europe. It's native to North America and is rarely found in the wild in the UK. But it's very common as a garden plant and in parks, and also as a garden escapee in urban environments. Its fruits are edible raw, though they can be fairly bitter, and it's best to spit out the seeds as they are very bitter. They're best made into jam or made into a red wine and Oregon grape jus to go with beef or venison. They look just like bunches of grapes and even have the whitish bloom on the skin. And the fruits ripen from June onwards. You'll see the leaves look quite similar to holly leaves. They're shiny and waxy and have sharp pointed spines. There are many types of plantains. I'll show you the 4 that are most common. They make good edible herbs and have many medicinal uses, especially in treating wounds and reducing inflammation. The plantains are high in calcium and phosphate. The plants in this family usually have veins that run the length of the leaf. The veins are strong and will often stay intact if you carefully break the leaf. They have distinctive tall flower spikes, and they mostly flower from around May or June and throughout the summer. This is Ribwort Plantain, Plantago lanceolata, or narrow-leaved plantain. This is probably the most common of the plantains in the UK. You will see this in pretty much every patch of grassland. So in lawns or in meadows like this, it's usually covered with Ribwort plantain. So the leaves are quite long and narrow, or lanceolate, and you can clearly see the parallel veins running the length of the leaf. And the leaves will grow at the base of the plant, not on the flower stem. So the flower stems have a square profile. You can roll them in your fingers, and they've got really fine hairs on them. The flower heads are quite small, and they've got really small white flowers on them. This is broad-leaved plantain or greater plantain, Plantago major. You'll find it growing in grasslands and in woodland openings, and it likes compressed, well-trodden soil along pathways and field openings and gates, a bit like pineapple weed does. The leaves are much shorter than Ribwort Plantain. They're oval and they have the parallel veins. They can grow fairly large, a bit bigger than these ones here, and they form a rosette at the base of the plant. Again, you get the long flower heads, but you'll see with greater plantain the flowers take up a much bigger percentage of the flower head, and they're not just growing near the top, they grow pretty much all the way down. It's a young one there that hasn't opened up yet. This is sea plantain, Plantago maritima. As the name suggests, it's a coastal plant that you can find around cliffs, coastal grasslands and marshlands. So this is my favourite of the plantains. It's got a nice salty flavour and quite crunchy leaves. It's best eaten raw. The leaves can look a little bit like grass. When it's mixed in with grasses, it's hard to tell them apart, especially the thinner leaves like this here. As the leaves mature, they broaden and flatten like this, and they do have the parallel veins like the other plantains, but they're not quite as pronounced. The vertical flower stems have tiny white hairs all over them, so it looks like they've got a bit of a fuzzy appearance. So these are young flower stems where they've not opened yet. On more mature ones like this, you'll see they've got tiny yellow flowers. The only plant you'll really mistake this for, apart from grasses, is sea arrowgrass, which is edible in small amounts. I covered that in one of the May videos. So keep an eye out for this plant when you're walking around the coast in amongst the rocks or in the grass. This is a good edible. This is buck's horn plantain, Plantago coronopus. This is also a coastal plant but can sometimes be found inland. You'll mostly find it in amongst rocks, on cliffs or in sandy soil. It's the most distinctive looking of the plantains. It gets its name because of the leaves separate, they look a bit like antlers, and the leaves have really fine hairs along the edges. So the plant grows in a really tight rosette, and the flower stems are quite a good identification feature because they grow vertically until they reach the edge of the rosette, and then they grow up vertically. The flower heads of the plantains often have a very mushroomy flavour. They can be eaten raw or cooked. I like them just pan fried with a small amount of oil. And you can also use them to make a mushroom flavour stock, simply by simmering them in water, then straining the liquid. Plantain leaves can be fairly bitter on their own. Apart from sea plantain, which I like to eat raw, the others I suggest you either cook, or if you're eating them raw, mix them in with some other greens. But ribwort and broadleaf plantain have really strong antibiotic properties and can be used on cuts to prevent infection, and they can also help to staunch bleeding on a small cut I've used them before when I've cut myself when out camping. Just chew them up or grind them into a poultice with a bit of water and then apply it directly to the wound, and it stops the bleeding almost instantly. They're really good. They're also an antihistamine, so it can be used on nettle stings and insect bites.